Thank you, Dr. Lamy, for taking the time to interview with us. Just had a couple of questions about your research.
Sure.
What exactly is your research topic, and where is your lab located?
Okay, my lab is the world because
Okay.
I'm international relations, and so I'm a Europeanist. So most of my work is in Europe. I study European foreign policy. I'm also a theorist, so that I also like to look at theory because I think everything starts from theories that we have in our head. Most students don't like theory, so the idea is that we try to get them to understand that this is how we frame things in the world. So I study mainly the countries of Europe in terms of what narratives have they accepted as the key narrative for their society. So for example, the Dutch narrative is based on a history of being a trading state, history of a country that's wanted peace because it's been overrun by larger countries, and a country that's based on international law and international principles. So most of my work is analyzing public policy records, decision making. I'm interested in why countries make decisions they do, and I'm also very interested in sort of on the ground research, interviews, and working with people who are actually in the public policy world. So my lab becomes whatever I'm working on. So now I'm working on the impact of climate change on global governance. So I'm working in Iceland, I'm working in Norway, and I'm working in Finland. Those are the three countries I'm working in. And last summer I took 18 kids with me, and we did research in those three countries as part of a course.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So how long have you been doing research on climate change?
Probably about 6 or 7 years. My real issue is global governance. How do countries come together and create rules?
Okay.
And obviously the next set of rules in an area like the Arctic in Europe has been on climate. So the climate comes in. So this is what research is, and students don't realize this. As faculty members, our research changes based on things that are happening in the world. Not a great deal, but we have to then educate ourselves. So I've been reading a lot, talking to my friends in science, et cetera, about what is climate science. I've been sitting in on classes with undergraduates and graduates to understand the climate science. So when I talk to Russian scientists, which I do, and they start talking about, ocean acidification and what that means, and if it goes up a certain amount, this is going to happen. I need to know that kind of stuff, and I need to know what's going on. So it's been about 5 to 7 years working on this.
So why is research in the area of global governance and social sciences important?
Well, last night we had a visit and a talk by David Miliband, and David Miliband was the foreign minister of Great Britain, and now he's head of the International Rescue Committee, and he was talking about the Syrian refugees. But in that discussion, he also talked about what are the critical challenges we have to look at. It's Syria today, but what's going to be the next refugee group? And he said the number one issue, as far as he was concerned, that's going to be a driver for refugees is climate change. And what we're going to have is climate refugees, because there's a process of what happens is that the rich and the powerful get involved in what's called resource capture. And so if, let's say, a country is affected by rising oceans, the rich and the powerful will push out the poor, take their land, and the poor become displaced persons inside the state, that's what we call them, or they become refugees in another state. Refugee crises can cause crises in other states. So just on that one issue, you can look at the instability that might be created. And one of our biggest problems in the world is what we call fragile states. And these are states that basically, they don't do the basic thing that we want from a government. So it's a very simple issue. I mean, you can operationalize. How do you operationalize a fragile state? What is a fragile state? I mean, you can't look at a state and say you're fragile just because it happens to be in Asia or Africa or whatever. It's a fragile state. There are three basic things states do. One is what we call defining activities, and that's a rule of law, a means of exchange, and protecting your boundaries. Then after that, you have to do what we call policies that are accumulation of wealth policies, where the government gets involved in helping people become wealthy. They build roads, they build highways, bridges, that kind of stuff. The third level is redistribution, and that's like education. Because if you get an education, wealth is redistributed. Because when you get your USC degree, we've guaranteed you $10 million, right? But you see what I mean. It's a redistribution policy. Failed states or fragile states aren't doing the first level. And see, those are increasing in fragile states. And the fragile states are going to become even more fragile because of climate. Long answer, but did you get the circle?
I did.
Okay.
Thank you. And what are the qualities that you look for in an undergraduate student? I know that you said you took a group of students last year to do research. So what kind of qualities did they possess that you valued in your research?
I don't like straight line students.
Okay.
Somebody who comes in here and says, I'm going to go to Marshall School and I'm going to just take these courses and I'm going to get a job as a mid-level manager and that sort of stuff. So what I like are zigzag students and students who are more concerned about authenticity. Where's their heart, where's their head, what do they want to do, and they're very authentic as students. And you can see that pretty easily. If somebody is wavering and they say, well, I think I'm going to make, I don't mind changing majors, but let's say they say, okay, I'm going to do an Annenberg, and I'm going to be in communication and journalism in Annenberg. Okay, great idea. What are you going to write about? So what's your minor? You got to write about something. So when I came to USC 25 years ago, one of the biggest majors was journalism and international relations, because of the way the world was. And so you got to write. So that's the kind of student who's thinking that way. I have a very simple formula that nobody else understands. So let me try it. I call it a student who has an idea, and that is somebody who's interested in I is innovation. D is discovery, research. E is engagement, so engagement with ideas and engagement with the world. And A is activism. And that's the kind of student I'm looking for. The kid who goes to class and runs home to watch, the third season of Game of Thrones is not somebody I'm interested in. Although, is there a third season of Game of Thrones yet?
I'm sure I don't watch Game of Thrones, so.
I don't either.
So what are some fun aspects of your research? Do you travel? Do you meet people on a daily basis?
Oh yeah, that's a great thing. I've traveled basically all around the world. In terms of I've spent time in Africa. I spent time in most European countries. And some has to do with research, and some has to do with research and teaching come together. So I was involved in a project funded by a foundation that basically, the Pew Foundation, where we rewrote the curriculum for all of about 13 universities that were part of the Soviet bloc when the Cold War ended, because they didn't have a curriculum, and because the Soviets told them what to teach. So we went in there to try to westernize, if you will, or modernize their curriculum and that sort of stuff. So I got to go to, I've been to Russia about 10 times. I've been to Czech Republic, Poland, Ukraine, Bulgaria, most of the Eastern European countries. Spent a semester in South Africa during apartheid. USC sent me there to work with two black universities there, University of the Transkei and Fort Hare. And I worked with their faculty and that sort of stuff, and it was still a homeland. So that's when the whites created these homelands so the African population, the black African population, would stay in that homeland. So we were in the Transkei and working with people there. So I've got a great opportunity, and you meet some fantastic people. I'm going this weekend to Korea to meet some people that I've been doing some work with, just for a couple days, just to talk about research and celebrate their university.
And do you have any prerequisites that are required by your research assistants, like classes or internships that you would prefer them to have taken before they research with you?
Curiosity and a will is the only thing. I have 13 undergraduate research assistants. In Dornsife we have something called SOAR and SURF, and I don't use that because I think it would be sort of unethical because I'm in charge of those programs, so I just put them on my research account. I have a research account as a faculty member. I have research money, and so I pay the students out of that, but I pay them the same wages as I do. So I have one group. I had a grant a few years ago. You're going to see that this guy's doing a lot of crazy things. I had a grant on religion and international relations from the Pew Foundation and the Luce Foundation, I'm sorry. And what we've done with that is we're developing case studies that look at an international relations issue and how do religious groups respond to that. So we just finished a project on torture, the Bush administration's torture, and we were looking at how different religious groups responded to the use of torture by the United States. And those are case studies that will become available to students and faculty around the world who want to use them. So there's a group working on that, and then there's a group working on a theory project, and a group working on a third project dealing with policy issues.
So I've seen that you've published more than 40 articles and book chapters. Are there opportunities for co-authorship with your research assistants?
Yeah, sure. I mean, their name goes and everything. So I have an Oxford University Press textbook it's going into its 4th printing, and in the front of the book, all the research assistants that have contributed to it get their name on it, and it's great because I give them a copy, and it becomes the Christmas present for mom, and and then they don't have to worry about Christmas presents ever again. And I think it's extremely important. I use a metaphor of I grew up in New England, and I used to climb up on barns and slide down the barn. So I say to my undergraduates, you need nails, because if you slide down a barn, you hit a nail, you stop. And so when in your resume, you have to have a resume that has a nail in it that causes somebody to stop and say, well, tell me more about this. Tell me more, because a lot of kids have the same resume. The name is different, but the same resume. They did an internship, and they did. But if for example, one of my students, she got a job in New York City working for a non-governmental organization, kind of doing research on children in conflict, and Marielle did, and she got it because she had been my research assistant in my teams for 2 years. She then got to parlay that into a job, and she's a producer now for Al Jazeera America. And it was all because she had research skills. They said, could you research this? She said, sure, I know what to look for, things like that. And it's also the ability, because the stuff you guys, your generation gets online is information. And how do you turn that information into knowledge? And that's one of my tasks in my research meetings is to always have that discussion. Okay, what does this tell us? What does this information tell us about knowledge and about developing the capacity to understand something? And it's not just about gathering the information, and that's a hard thing to do, because you guys you can get all this wonderful information from your phone, but then it's how do you discuss this, so you look at the meaning of it and what does it mean if it shifts and all that kind of stuff.
So can you describe for me a day in your research setting?
Well, now that I'm on the dark side, which means I'm a dean, days are hard to come by. But usually, what I try to do when I'm focusing on my research, there's a couple things. One, there's at least 3 parts of the research. The first part is, what are the interesting questions that I want to explore? And you need downtime. You can't be in an office like this. You need the downtime to think. And that might be a bicycle ride or a run or something like that. And that's where I would call sort of the initiation phase of my research. And you start thinking about questions you want to explore, and you write those questions down. The second phase of that is when you start formulating in essentially a research design. You formulate a research design based on those particular questions. Those 2 sides are the hardest, and a lot of that I do in the summer. I have a cabin in Colorado, which is real quiet. It's not, I don't get email there and things like that, and so I do a lot of that there. And then there's the field work, so I have to go gather information and stuff like that, and some of that might be government documents, some of it might be interviewing people and talking to people, and there's a lot of reading. You got to do a lot of reading. That's where I use a lot of my research assistants to say, get me the last 10 years, get me 4 or 5 really good articles on geopolitics. And they go out and we talk about why is this the best one, that sort of stuff. And then the final phase, not the final phase, then there's basically, okay, here's the ideas, now I'm going to implement that by writing a chapter in a book or working on a book or whatever. So that's the next phase of that. And of course, then the final phase is where the research is evaluated by whoever I send it, if I send it to a journal, they evaluate it and they'll come back and say, you got to make these changes, and these changes. So that's generally the path, and it's intensive. And what prevents that from happening smoothly is administrative positions. I mean, this is the worst thing that can happen to anybody who's interested in research.
Being on the dark side.
Yeah.
So what is the biggest obstacle in your field or in research in general that you find that you encounter?
I saw your pre-questions and I said, God, that's a great question. I think in my field, in the social sciences, I think it's these insane arguments about methodology. Are you qualitative or quantitative? When I was a grad student back in the 1600s, this was the debate. You know, if you're qualitative, you do descriptive research, you have to know languages and that sort of stuff, but that's not as sophisticated as somebody who uses quantitative approaches. Mm-hmm. Well, that debate is back again, and it gets in the way of really doing something. The methodology determines what you study, not the questions, not the critical questions. I mean, at the heart, I'm a Kantian theorist, so that's who I identify with as in theory. As a Kantian theorist, I'm interested in cosmopolitan rights. I'm interested in issues dealing with universal values and human rights and things like that. And so, people say nobody's publishing that stuff anymore, you know, because it's not quantitative. It's not dealing with big data. Like the student that I had to meet just before you, she's interested in big data and that stuff. There's good stuff in big data. And again, Miliband, who was here last night, they've got a project with NYU on children in conflict, mm-hmm. and they're using big data to try to find out how they can best respond to children who are victims in conflict situations. So there doesn't have to be an antagonistic relationship. But now you meet with graduate students and they say, well, I'm not going to go a qualitative way. I'm going to go quantitative because that's the only way I can get a job. And that's the most frustrating thing, is that we need to be pluralistic in our approaches and understand that there are different approaches to understanding these topics, and one methodology doesn't trump another methodology. And we have to also remember that the questions are most important, not the methods. That's, to me, the big frustrating thing. And time. Time is the other. I mean, it's hard to be at it's really, I really think the untenured professors have a really tough time because they see everything as, if I spend more time with my students and I spend more time on teaching, I'm going to have less time on research, which means I won't get tenure. Yeah. So the tenure thing is really, it's really hard to get tenure at R1s now. And that's what we are.
So do you have any final words of advice for students looking to get involved in international relations research?
I would say not just international relations. I think freshmen need to start. I have 18 kind of mentor questions that I give my students. And And I actually did some talks to I do a lot of talks to students and that sort of stuff. And I said, Stan Rosen over in one of the New North has a professor. He has a night where he brings in people and that sort of stuff. And I said, this is 3 weeks into the semester. I said, you guys are 2 weeks late already. You've got to right away. You can't wait till your sophomore, junior. Start finding out what your professors are. You need 3 mentors, and you should try to set up something where you're doing research with those or whatever with those mentors, because you're going to need letters of recommendation and things like that. So, what are you?
I'm a neuroscience and health promotion major.
But what year?
I'm a junior.
See, you should have you worked in research with professors? See, so you're okay. But now you have to be thinking about what fellowships you're going to apply for. So who are your 3 letter writers? See, that's what you have to start thinking about. Who are you going to start doing research? I mean, you've done research, but who are you going to get to write those letters? And which of the fellowships are you going to apply for? Are you going to apply for a Fulbright, a Rhodes, a Marshall, a Mitchell? That starts freshman year, thinking about that. So we're doing a boot camp this fall with students, this spring, on, okay, so you want to apply for a Marshall, a Mitchell, a Gates. You want to apply for one of those. Do you want to go to medical school?
Yes.
You better going to medical school if you've got a fellowship. So have you ever studied Asia?
No.
Good. Apply for a loose fellowship. I'll send you some ideas. Caroline Hennon is the model for you. Caroline was a student of mine. She was pre-med IR, okay? She got a loose fellowship. She went to Zimbabwe first. That's when we could go there, study abroad, and did public health work in Zimbabwe. Then she got a loose fellowship, went to Thailand and worked with the refugee camps and sex workers in Thailand for the Thai government. Came back, then worked for Senator Wellstone in Minnesota, worked for him for a couple of years, and then said, okay, now it's time to go to medical school. And she graduated from medical school about 4 years ago, and she was at the Mayo Clinic Medical School,
Yeah.
which is a pretty good one, I think.
Pretty good.
And now she's a pediatrician. But she kept raising up and that sort of stuff. So that, you know, who's going to write for you right now?
I have my PI, Dr. Leventhal, and
Okay.
Another researcher, Dr. Goldfinger, so far, and then my organic chem teacher.
Who's
Dr.
that?
Jung.
Who's that one?
Jen.
Okay, yeah, Ken's good. Those are good letters. Get somebody outside sciences to write for you. Are you thinking about applying for things like Marshall, Mitchell?
I am.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to go to medical school right away, so.
So you're perfect. Yeah, if you want to talk to I've got a former student of mine, Reed Lidow. He got the Gates Cambridge Fellowship. If you want to send me a note if you want to talk to him, because he's here in town now. He finished his 1 year at Cambridge, but that's a fantastic fellowship, and that really opens up a lot of doors for you. It'd be great. It'd be great.
Thank you for taking this
No.
time. Pleasant.
Sorry to be late. I apologize.
No, it's totally fine. I'd rather have you here than not at all. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I hope it was useful.
Yes. of
Great to
course.
meet you.